very much. If you can hear me, I apologize for, feel like we're sort of not in the middle of the stage, so I apologize to our friends on the right. It's not a political statement of any kind. So I want to first thank Minister Rob and Mr. DeMarti for joining us. At one point, I think we had a much bigger set of panelists, but I think it's great that you've chosen to stay with us here in Washington to talk about the services negotiations, and there's a lot of activity that's going on. I'd like to, I think Minister Rob's bio is in the booklet. We had the opportunity to chat a bit yesterday, and I must say, for somebody that's been on the job for 4 weeks, he is a very formidable advocate for Australia's views on services and the trade agenda. So we're looking forward to having a great discussion with you, Minister.
Thanks,
Jean-Luc, it's always great to see you. I will always think of you as an agriculture negotiator, but it's great that you have now broadened your horizons to also talk about services. We worked really hard on that in the Uruguay round to make people think about things more than agriculture and services. So very much welcome your participation here. We'll hear from Minister Rob, and then we'll hear from Mr. DeMarti, and then have a few questions and open up the floor. Our guests have been kind enough to say that they will take questions from the audience. So, Minister Rob.
Well, thanks very much, Dorothy, and thank you to CSI for the invitation. It's a great opportunity for me to gather some early soundings and feelings on attitudes around the world, and the discussion last night was a really good starting point. Thanks. I thought I'd just open with some expose on why, from Australia, we are very, very keenly involved in the TPP and the TISA negotiations. We do see services as, in a way, the sort of new frontier, I suspect, if you could put it that way, because when you look at it, services, they drive all businesses, whether you're involved in manufacturing, construction, resources and energy, agriculture, health, education, hospitality, you name it. Services are fundamental to the driving of all of those. And in Australia, we're often seen as basically, a resources and energy and agricultural country, which has been a traditional driver and will always be. But we are 75% services. 75% of our economic activity is services. And in fact, around the strengths that we have got as an economy, all those services are our strengths related to those particular business strengths. And 4 in 5 jobs are in services, and yet only 20% of our exports. Now, we see in many ways TPP and TISA, because so many FTAs and other agreements have always, services have always been very badly served, I think. The poor cousin in so many of these agreements. And now the opportunity, and it's a bit ironic given that the Doha round stalled to some extent, that this focus on services has popped out as an opportunity. And it's fortuitous in a way, I think, because in life, sort of timing is everything. And from where we sit, we've got a lot of the emerging economies are at a stage where they now are demanding, or they need services, and they're starting to recognise that the next step up for them is to adopt services that they currently haven't got. And you take China, for instance. China wants to reform. In fact, more importantly, it must reform, because despite the enormous growth and the 250 million people that have come out of poverty, which is sort of unprecedented in world history in many respects in the last 15 or 20 years, they've still got 700 million peasants who are not sharing in the prosperity that much of the rest of the country is. But what they also have got are those 700 million now with a knowledge of what is possible, because they're aware. They've got mobile phones and all the rest. And there is an awareness now. That's true of what happened in the Middle East with the uprisings. All of these things, because there is now an awareness around the world amongst the less developed and the poorer classes about what is possible. They're not ignorant any longer of what is possible there, out there. And this is very much, I think, from my exposure to the Chinese, and it's true in other emerging economies, they see, unless they do address this and maintain the growth and the momentum and the reform, and unless they lead their economy to a consumer-led economy rather than an export-led economy, that they're going to have a lot of unrest within the community. And services, they are now starting to understand, services in all its sort of manifestations is fundamental to that movement from an export-led to a consumer-led. So there's a very fundamental driver for this focus on services, and it is time. The timing is right because of that awareness to have this focus now. If we can, through these agreements, establish a set of global rules that will help drive the opening up of services in a proper and constructive and open fashion, then we have served humanity in a very significant way. In this regard, Australia sees the new focus on services as very much an opportunity, a serious opportunity. Much of our opportunities in the future for growth for our country will be the export of services across many, many different sectors. And it's not a defensive stance, it's an opportunity. And it's why we welcome the interest of other countries, such as China, if they do ultimately share our objectives and the rules and all of the rest that these agreements come up with, that we ultimately very much welcome the interest of China and others in these negotiations. And in fact, it is our strong view that TPP, which is at a very advanced stage, and TISA that must be constructed in a way which allows other countries progressively to come on board so that these become multilateral agreements in the end. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Jean-Luc?
Thank you very much, Dorothy. After the very eloquent plead for Mr. Rob, with already very, very, very engaged, very impressive, only after a few weeks, and would like to congratulate him. I would focus mainly on how we see TISA and TTIP. So I will not make a long introduction about the importance of services. It has been said very often and very eloquently also by Ambassador Froman. The EU is engaged in many negotiations, Japan, Thailand, Vietnam, and has just concluded with Canada, but it's clear that the two most important negotiations in terms of services from our perspective are TISA and TPP. Here, what I would start with TISA. TISA negotiation is a unique occasion to progress trade in services liberalization while progressively extending the group of participants. From the outset, the EU was convinced that this initiative could only make sense if, first, it is built in a way that provides for future multilateralization, and second, it is open to any WTO member which share the same objectives. We believe that the first objective has been achieved, and we welcome the fact that the group has endorsed a series of provisions which ensure a potential future multilateralization. The EU welcomes the fact that other WTO members have shown signs of interest and is ready to engage with them. But above all, the meaning of TISA negotiation is to be found in the substance, in the value it will create. The value will be coming from two sources. First, TISA negotiation is about leveling liberalization commitments across all participants. There's been a lot of debate on the spaghetti bowl created by our bilateral trade agreements. The TISA is a unique opportunity to sort it out and correct asymmetries that exist among participants with respect to trade in services liberalization. In this context, we strongly believe that working on a set of standards to be endorsed by all participants could be a creative and ambitious way forward. Second, the TISA negotiation will allow us, at last, to update existing multilateral rules on key services sectors, such as telecommunication or financial services. As the TISA participants are currently reviewing those regulatory disciplines, are considering how to improve and modernize them, I am really convinced that this work can create a very important and valuable deliverable. In a way, TISA has the vocation of completing the unfinished DDA agenda on services. On top of those aspects, the more WTO member will embrace the objective of this initiative and join the group, the more we'll be able to extend its benefits. In this respect, TISA will become the new platform upon which future bilateral agreements like TTIP will be built. Now, on TTIP, I'm glad to take the opportunity to set out the EU visions on the services negotiation in TTIP. And we have all said several times, TTIP is a game changer in trade policy. I fully subscribe to what the Business Coalition for Transatlantic Trade has set out in its recent policy paper on TTIP. This agreement is bound to be ambitious, comprehensive, and high standard. But I would like to add one further qualifier, a label for TTIP, innovative. This agreement is like no other and certainly not business as usual. A copy and paste from what the EU and US did in previous agreements, say our FTA with Korea. So the EU has made very clear, even before the first round, that we'll pursue an ambitious agenda. And I would like to mention three areas: market access, regulatory aspects, and mobility. So I will not detail them now, but I'm sure there will be questions on that. I will say only a word on a delicate issue in the present context. In particular, the issue of data flows, which is very important in this negotiation, and in its articulation with data protection in the light of recent events. So I would not repeat what very eloquently Vice President Reding has said yesterday. So the EU position is very clear. So there is a lot of trust and confidence between the both sides of the Atlantic, between trade negotiators. We need also a global context of trade and confidence. We are not and will not negotiate data protection in this negotiation, which is a fundamental right. But it's quite clear that it's possible, while respecting the legislation on both sides of the Atlantic, to have data flows as an element of TTIP agreement. But there is still a lot of work to be done, and I'm confident then we can be successful. So after this brief remark, I would like to conclude on TTIP with one more point. I recognize that some ask the questions about the interplay between TISA and TTIP. What do we need TTIP if we have TISA? My answer is simple. TISA is a very important agreement. It shows that we are able to take the STAL DDA services negotiation forward among those who are willing to make progress, and we may be able to set regulatory standards which will be a benchmark for the future. But the countries participating in TISA are too heterogeneous a group to achieve the level of ambition which I have sketched out for TTIP before. Addressing sensitive sectors on market access, going for deep regulatory cooperation, or fostering cross-border mobility. This is only conceivable in a relationship as deep as the transatlantic, and I think we need to be clear in our minds of this fundamental point. Thank you very much for your attention.
Well, thank you very much to both of you. Lots of interesting comments. If I might ask a couple of questions just to start the ball rolling. Minister, I know that you have a lot of negotiations on your plate. There have been articles about new mandates for you to finish a lot of negotiations, including an FTA with China, work on TPP, some other FTAs. How do you see the key decisions in services across all of these agreements? Are there some common threads here that that you're talking to your stakeholders about in Australia?
Yes, very much so. In fact, the way I view it is that I see all of these different bilaterals and plurilaterals and all the rest as bricks in a wall, if you like. As long as they are constructed on a common set of rules, right, that in the end you are building a multilateral wall almost, but with all these different agreements. So we are trying to learn from the TPP experience, which is well advanced and is a 21st century, attempted a 21st century agreement, goes into new areas which are still equally as important to some of the emerging economies. I mean, one of the FTAs is with Japan, which is not an emerging economy, but with Korea, which is somewhere in between, and with China, which is. I mean, all of the 21st century the 21st century developments are all critical, and many of those countries are leaders in a lot of that technology. So we're trying to take from the TPP, for instance, elements of that and seeing if we can capture it, but certainly have whatever we got in the FTAs consistent with the TPP, so that ultimately, you know, you can almost take modules out of different agreements and insert them, saying this is what we'd like to achieve, and you get that continuity. So that's the sort of principled approach that we're taking, and in that way I think we can keep a number of balls in the air because there are sort of common elements across all of them.
Thank you. Jean-Luc, I know that the Commissioner was just in China or just had consultations with the Chinese. The Commission has embarked on negotiations for an investment agreement with China. The U.S. is working on a bilateral investment agreement. How do you see those discussions relating to a discussion in something like the TISA and the relationship? Because obviously the Chinese were in the U.S. Not long ago and basically said that they were going to negotiate on the basis of a negative list and pre-establishment. In terms of your negotiations with the Chinese, how does all this fit with what your expectations are for the TISA?
First, we have just launched, we will launch very soon, we have already got the mandate to negotiate an investment agreement with China, which in our view should be not only an agreement on investment protection, but also would cover market access. More or less the same approach that the United States is following for its bilateral negotiation with China, and understand there have been recently some progress. Our view about China in TISA, first, for us, it's a very important signal politically and economically that China would like to join the TISA negotiation. Clearly, it's a strategic choice, in our view, certainly linked basically to China interest, but linked probably to a will to reform domestically in services. I have been particularly struck by a speech from Premier Li Keqiang in, I think, in May, where he has drawn the intention of the importance of services for China. So, and we know that a lot has to be done here. So, in our view, what would be the conditions? I don't think that there would be special conditions for China joining this negotiation, but we have to have a reasonable assurance that China is sharing the same level of ambition. They have already indicated they were prepared to accept the December framework. They are ready to accept the architecture of the text, which has been very recently agreed. So I think these are important steps, but we need more. I think it should be settled through bilateral conversation between the different partners in this negotiation and China to see if what we have as a priority, each of us, can be satisfied by China in this negotiation. It should not be a pre-negotiation, but we would have some greater light about what are China's intentions. I'm not sure that China has already made up all its choices on that. They've engaged, I think, in this negotiation. They wish to engage this negotiation, mainly also in order to organize internal reform, domestic reform, and I think we cannot miss this opportunity. There are always elements of risk in any negotiation. We are not gamblers, but we have also be able to take some risk, and in my view, not taking risk leads to take a lot of risk and lead to no results.
So let me ask you, the TISA negotiations have been working on a pretty ambitious timeline. They've started to talk about offers. They're working pretty hard. There's a negotiating session next week. There's a whole series of developments. What's your vision, if I could ask both of you, what's your vision in terms of the timeline for the TISA? Because some people think that no negotiation becomes real until there's actually a deadline. Obviously, if you're going to keep adding participants, when do you have, how do you finish the TISA or get it to a stage that you can start realizing some of the benefits?
Well, for us, we want to see it completed as soon as possible, but and it's a high priority. And as I said before, we'll try and again capture out of TPP things that we'll insert into TISA. But we've got 4 on our plate at the moment, which we're trying to complete in the next 12 months. TISA is the other significant. We've got a couple of other minor ones, but that's the other major one, which as we knock over some of these others, it will release some of the resources, as you know better than most. These things can consume some serious resources, and some of the sort of critical expertise that you need is not sort of sitting on the shelf. So TISA is a priority for us. It is at a stage which we can manage with these early negotiations. We will present our first cut of offerings in the timetable that's been set, but I haven't got a final date for you. But once we get clear of some of these others, it'll be our first priority, you know, after the next 10 months.
Yeah. In our view, substance is more important than fixing artificial delays. So we should not engage in an endless negotiation as we have seen in the Doha round previously, but we should not fix artificial deadlines. I think that it will be a relatively complex negotiation which will require time. Certainly, I think that we should not imagine we can conclude this negotiation within a few months. It will require a bit more. We should be engaged. We are engaged. We will table an offer relatively soon on the EU side. And certainly, I think that if we have some big emerging developing countries joining the negotiation, like China, in good faith, with sufficient ambition, I think that it would be important that we conclude this negotiation also with them. And in these circumstances, in my view, we will take the time which will be necessary to get this result, because we will fix the architecture of what would be a new 21st century approach in services. And for years, we know that GATS is outdated, and it's important to invest enough brain, enough energy, enough political will to get these results really obtained and done.
Please.
Could I just add something? Thanks, Dorothy. My sense is, and I was at APEC recently and other negotiations around the world, my sense is that there is a growing realisation around the world that the sort of interventionist approach has run its race in terms of dealing with the global financial crisis, that there needs to be, that trade is going to drive growth. I mean, I think that is emerging quite strongly, and as a consequence, I think we've got to take advantage of it. That's why I agree with Jean-Luc that you know, we want an ambitious and effective agreements, but there does seem to be a momentum there which we've got to, you know, you've got to surf the wave when it's there. And to me, the wave is there, right? And not for all of these things. And you know, I look at Japan. I've only been through one set of negotiations on TPP. Very constructive approach, in my view. You know, and I know in our own one-on-one relations with them, a great keenness to get on and reform and all the rest. So I feel that's true in so many of the countries, both emerging and developed, and a sort of a disenchantment with some of the policy, you know, expectations of the last few years, and the only way people see they're going to bounce out of this sort of low growth phenomena is trade's going to be a very big part of that. So we should not lose that momentum, I suppose. That's my point. We should stretch ourselves to try and accommodate as many of these and conclude these things, I think, as properly, but as quickly as possible while you've got that wave.
Okay, thank you very much. So let me ask you, the question about the negotiations and transparency and what's going on in the negotiations and how you consult with stakeholders has been a big issue for all of us. Can you talk a little bit, Minister Robb, about the consultation process that you've undertaken in services? I note, for example, that just on the question of data flows, that the Australian Services Coalition has recently written to you on the importance of data flows and services, server localization issues. If I could ask you to comment on that, and Jean-Luc as well, if you could comment on the consultations that you've undertaken.
Well, with TPP, let me deal with that one in particular. I think we've had now something in excess of 600 separate consultations with stakeholders across goods and services per se, and many of those sort of obviously multiple contacts, including from group contacts to individual contacts to whatever, you name it. There's been over 600 different forms of consultation, and it's still ongoing. So I'm quite confident that there is a keen awareness of where we're at, and that our negotiators are reflecting the mood. There has been this issue of data flows raised. The fact is that we support a very ambitious outcome on e-commerce, and including data flows, right? We've had one issue, well, not one issue, but I'm finding it's true for every country. Apart from a specific requirement like personal health records, we've had, again, a very ambitious e-health program. We've spent billions on this, and to get a single electronic record, and to get people to trust even that single electronic record is a big step, yeah. Right? And but it's happening, right? People can see the advantage of being able to go anywhere, anytime, have it on them, if you like, their records. But there is a great, in order to give the confidence that at the moment, from a privacy point of view, there is a demand from that health community that personal records should not be sent across borders. It's even difficult enough to send them interstate in Australia, but that's been resolved. I mean, these are stepwise processes, right? So apart from quite very narrow and specific things, we've got a very open and globalised approach to e-commerce and data movements. I mean, 15 years ago, I went into a joint venture with the US's biggest data management company, Axiom, and built the Australian arm of that. Now, Axiom has 22 of the top 24 credit card companies and all of their marketing data. So even 15 years ago, in Australia, where, it created 200 jobs in Australia, but I was sending all of the marketing data from Australia for 22 of the top 24 credit cards to boxes in 5 acres in Conway, Arkansas. So it wasn't even the 21st century, right? It was in the 20th century that we were doing that, and it was acceptable. I was chairman of the Australian Direct Marketing Association. All of these privacy issues were very prominent, but that was still acceptable 15 years ago. It's certainly still acceptable now. So what I'm saying is there is a culture and a debate which has been very vigorous on privacy and other things, and in the main, people are quite accepting, and certainly with the emergence of social media and all the rest, and the younger generation seem to be far more relaxed about their own personal data of all sorts, wherever it might end up. But so we have got a culture in Australia, I think, which is very globalised in that sense, and we need to take advantage of, because we are a small economy relative to, say, the US and many other developed countries, and we need to have to take advantage, especially in the electronic space, of critical mass. So I just wanted to clear that up. We will be there and be very supportive of a very ambitious e-commerce outcome.
Thank you. Jean-Luc, on the transparency
Yeah,
point.
on the transparency issue, first, I would like to recall that by construction, the EU system is very transparent, deliberately and sometimes less deliberately. Why? Because in reality, we are not a country, we are a set of member states, 28 member states, and we are negotiating, monitored, steered also by member states, and we are informing them regularly, and we now, with the Lisbon Treaty in application since November 2009, we have to treat and it's good, the European Parliament in the same way. So by construction, we are open. Doesn't mean that there are not improvements which are possible. And in particular, we have improved our system of dialogue with stakeholders in the TTIP negotiation. And there will be, in my view, here new standards which probably will be at a certain moment generalized. On TISA, certainly we have also a lot of dialogue with stakeholders, institutionalized and less institutionalized. And I have to recall also that before launching any initiative, including negotiation, we have to have an impact assessment. And this impact assessment is also part of this impact assessment is consultation of stakeholders. For TISA, due to the delay and due to the fact that it was something linked in a way to the DDA on services, we have not have a formal impact assessment because it would have delayed the EU participation to this negotiation by several months, which would have been disruptive for this negotiation. But we are in the process of having some form of impact assessment. I will not enter into our jargon, but what we are calling an SEA, but which also will, in a way, which also be a form of impact assessment. So all in all, we are in favor of transparency. I know that sometimes we are criticized and pretending that we are negotiating in secret. It's not the case. We are not negotiating on the public place, but we are the more transparent we can. And in our view, in the world of today, it's not possible to, let's say, to negotiate without reporting, without having a strong engagement with stakeholders.
So thank you very much. Thank you very, very much. So
Thanks,
let's open the floor up. We have a little bit of time. And I think there are microphones if people could. So in the back, we'll let Mr. Vastine, former president of CSI, start us off.
Thanks very much, Dorothy. And thank you, everyone. Bob Vastine, now with the Georgetown Center for Business and Public Policy. So it's become a commonplace that regulation is the major obstacle to progress in services negotiations. And there are a number of ways to approach that. One of them, you mentioned, Mr. Marti, is the sectoral negotiation in telecoms in the follow-on to the Uruguay round. The telecoms reference paper, which is widely considered a great success. So would it be possible to replicate that sector-by-sector approach to regulation in the TISA and in the TTIP, Or is it necessary really to agree on a set of broad principles that must apply across all sectors, and on which there is confusion, there is disagreement between the EU and the US, certainly. So what is the most efficient path to secure the goal, which is to lessen regulation, to improve the market in services in these various negotiations?
Thanks.
Yeah, it's a very important and very difficult question. We know that the regulatory aspects in negotiations are probably the most difficult ones. In TISA, certainly there are some things which can be done, but from the EU perspective, we would probably invest more on the regulatory side in TTIP. For us, TTIP, the regulatory elements, the regulatory silo of TTIP is essential for the negotiation, including in services. And I think that we should look at that from also a global perspective, but also we have to look at sector by sector too. It's certainly the case. And we know we have still some issues to tackle, for example, where we are not yet on the same page on financial services, for example. And I would like on that would like to be very clear. We are not on the EU side proposing that the trade negotiator will substitute to the regulators who are dialoguing, and we hope would be ready to get results. What we are proposing is that this element should be also embroiled in the TISA, in the TTIP negotiation, and they will be part of the agreement, and the agreement also should be a living agreement on that, because we know on the regulatory side, it's important that there will be also, will not solve everything in one day. We have to have a living agreement with a structure which paves the way for future progress later, without having to rebuild a new agreement. So these also are important elements.
Please. Thank you.
It seems to me, and Jean-Luc is reflecting that, I think, that it's a bit like the multilateral structure, okay? It's the Doha round has stalled, and hopefully fortuitously and effectively, what has popped out in the interim is the services focus, but also there's an attempt at some agricultural issues. So there you've got, two quite distinct areas, but agriculture is an industry sector, and I think you just, whatever's going to work, these are bricks in a wall, in a sense. And even on the services, I think it is better to take a multilateral approach. Right? So ultimately, if you can achieve one set of principles and one set of outcomes across all different services. But I look at things like financial services in China, right? They've got a regulation which limits the amount of ownership of their city-based domestic banks by foreign banks of 20%. Now, at 20%, what's needed in a financial sense in China are sophisticated financial products. And for a company to come in, a bank to come in, and with a 20% shareholding, they can't get enough return on their IP, on that IP, that expertise. They can't get enough from 20%. Maybe they would at 40%, right? Or in another service, maybe 20% would deliver an effective a profitable outcome. So if you try and, do all at once, you may get nowhere, which is what's happened with the multilateral so far. So I do think it's, you aim for the best, and I think with TC we try and get a set of principles, but we might have to, on the way through, take some industry approaches. I don't know yet, but all I'm saying is I think we ought to have that flexibility to try and, get the best outcome you can, and you then build from that later on.
Thank you. So I see in the back, I think Mr. Stewart. And then there are two other questions in the center. I don't know if there's anybody else on either side. I want to discriminate. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Steve Stewart with IBM. Minister Rob, it was good to hear you talk about Australia's ambitious outcome that it would like to see in the e-commerce chapter, recognizing, of course, the need to protect personal medical records. And Mr. DeMarti, I know that personal data privacy is also a very important issue in Europe. Recognize that, and I fully agree with that, and certainly IBM works very hard to protect the data of our clients. But in today's economy, any company anywhere in the world that engages in international trade and investment is going to use the internet to move data. In fact, you can look at movement of data as being the lifeblood of international commerce today. Recognizing that, and recognizing also that our current trade agreements don't really address these digital trade issues, if you could outline in both of your cases, whether it's TPP or TTIP or TISA, what are the elements you think are needed to be able to get good digital trade rules in an e-commerce chapter or elsewhere? What does the agreement have to say basically about privacy? And also if you could comment on what's needed in educating your own publics, citizens in your countries, about the importance of digital trade and how you simply can't have trade and investment taking place on a global basis today without moving data around. Thank you.
Thank you.
I might take the last part. I think John Luke will probably be more expert and experienced on the first part. On the education of our communities, look, Australia is, we're early adopters, right? So if you take the top 25 developed economies, I think we rank about 6th in terms of uptake. We love widgets, we love taking anything that's new, we're onto it. But if you look at how much money is being spent across our economy on digitisation, because it's everywhere, it's in every aspect of our life now, we're 25th out of 25. So we're still trying to work out why this is the case, because we're a high-cost economy, and we desperately need to be in the top 10, because we'll always be a high-cost economy. We've got high labour rates and all the rest. We desperately need the advantages of digitisation. So a lot of it, I think, is leadership. There's sort of a complacency because of this. So there's no problem with people adopting, and in fact, it might have been part of the problem with us that a lot of companies were early adopters of the internet and other things and feel that they've sort of done that. Management feels, well, I've done that stage, and yet the rest of the world's galloping past us because of the absolute sort of, rapid rate of innovation in this whole space. So in Australia, we haven't got a problem, I don't think, with educating people, but we have got, our educational problem is to convey that we're slipping behind the rest because we're not spending enough money on it. We're not investing a big enough proportion of development money. So it's a bit of a different problem than other countries face.
Thank you. Jean-Luc?
So my answer will be very short and very clear. As you know, we have a new legislation in the EU for an adaptation of the present legislation on data protection. It has been just voted by the European Parliament last week and validated by the European Council, Head of State of Government, last week too. It's not yet exactly formally agreed, but it's close. And I think that we have to live with this legislation as it is. And I agree with you that in the modern world, data flows are absolutely indispensable. And we have to resolve the different constraints on both sides, from the data flows perspective, which are indispensable, and from the respect of data protection and data privacy on the other hand. So we cannot ignore one of the elements, and that's, I know it's challenging, and we have to work on that. We'll not negotiate our respective regulation in TTIP, nor in that and nor in other sectors. It's not a deregulation agenda. It's an agenda to make our regulation more compatible and more coherent with some form of equivalence. And I hope that in this domain, like in others, it will be possible.
So thank you very much. So there were two hands up. If I could ask the indulgence of my favorite sheriff, who is coming next on the program, if we can take those two questions and then have the panelists answer. So gentleman who was in front of Mr. Stewart had his hand up, and gentleman with his hand up, we can go to you, sir, first, and then you, and then we'll finish.
Thank you. Pascal Carnet from the European Services Forum in Brussels. I wanted to come back to the interplay between TPP, TTIP, and TISA. Not only on the market access issue, I think, the European Union is negotiating more or less with the TPP. We have negotiation with Japan, Malaysia, Vietnam, Singapore, Peru, Colombia, Costa Rica, Panama. We finish with Canada. So we nearly have the same blocks, few are missing. My question is about coherence of the rules which are going to be negotiated in all of those agreements, in the TPP, in the TISA, and in the TTIP. Because yes, we want to focus on regulatory coherence. And in the goods aspect, we have so many spaghetti bowls about the rules of origins, NTBs, etc. We would like to avoid that into the services area. And therefore, we would urge at least that if it is not possible to go all together, that the rules are going to be coherent when any negotiation are going to be finished. And I don't know how our panelists will be able to answer to that. Thank you.
Okay, if we could just take this next question, and then we can take the answers together, if that's okay with you.
Sure.
Thank you for taking another question. I'm Matt Schul from Inside U.S. Trade. My question is actually for Minister Rob regarding two sort of high-profile issues in TPP that involve Australia. The first is investor-state dispute settlement, and the second is sugar. So I was just wondering if you could give the,
How sugar
give
gets
us,
from point A to point B. I think he's talking about services
Yes.
trade and sugar.
but give us an idea of the
Logistics.
new government's, now that you have this mandate to negotiate TPP, what is the new, Abbott government's position on investor state? Is it willing to entertain that in TPP? And then, on sugar, the U.S. for a long time has refused to entertain, greater market access for sugar and other agricultural goods from Australia in TPP. Have you sensed any change in that position, and is that a deal breaker for Australia?
So that's like three questions. Okay. Gentlemen, who wants to go first? Coherence and...
Well, I'll deal with, if you like.
Yeah,
John,
it's fine.
I'll deal with that last question. I think Ambassador Froman, did you put this similar question to him? But I suppose, I've been involved in different types of negotiations all my life, and I've never really been involved in a negotiation where one side puts all their cards on the table and the other one holds theirs up. But and that's in a sense what you're asking me to do here this morning. So can I? But it's I understand the motivation, and it was a nice try. But can I just say that the market access? Of course, sugar. We're always looking for more of sugar, but also grain and beef and mutton and you name it. But the thing is, with the TPP, it is at an advanced stage, but I think, again, Ambassador Froman said this morning, you know, the hard parts usually come at the end, and it's the final offers on market access. I think in every case, in case of all 12 countries, to sell it back at home, you've got to show that there's material improvement in your market access. So all of these other concessions, which are important, but they come at a cost often. There's often a lot of resistance, not just in Australia, but every participation, every country that's participating. So the market access issue is really quite critical. And for us, with agriculture, it's not the only thing, but it's an important one. And, you know, we have got a 21st century agreement we're trying to strike, but there are sort of 19th century things that still haven't been resolved in agriculture in some cases. So I say that half in jest because I've been 30 years in and around the agricultural one, and not a lot's changed around the world in terms of access. So we are looking very strongly at the market access outcomes, as well as, you know, doing, I think, our bit, because we are very committed to having a very ambitious outcome. And the better the market access, the more ambition we can accommodate.
Thank you. Jean-Luc?
Yeah. Question of on coherence is a very important one. It's valid not only in services, it's valid also in other parts of the negotiation, everywhere. And with the multiplication of bilateral negotiation, it's clear that this coherence agenda is more and more important. And on the EU side, we are more and more vigilant on that. And for example, as Director General for Trade of the European Commission, I'm not chief negotiator for any negotiation, except in Geneva for the DDA, but which is relatively slow. So my task as Director General in the EU is to be vigilant on the coherence, and I can assure you that we are looking at that very closely. About TISA, TTIP, it's clear that we'll have to discuss between United States and EU how we see respectively what can be done in TISA, what can be done in TTIP. I've already indicated it in our view. TTIP by nature should be more ambitious, and we have shown that with in our negotiation with Canada, it's not the moment to enter into too many details, but that it was possible. It was more ambitious than all our previous negotiation, with Korea. So it's quite possible. So that's my answer on that. And I would not resist to answer a question I've not been asked. It's not on services, on sugar, which is we have all in bilateral negotiation sensitivities, but on both sides. But in any negotiation, there should not be exclusion, and there should be additional market access, even for sensitive products, in our view, in negotiations. Just to precise, the EU is now, at least in a bilateral negotiation with United States, not sensitive on sugar, is rather even offensive on sugar, just to flag that. If we would not negotiate with Australia, it would be a bit different. But So, sorry for having not resisted to answer a question I have not been asked.
Very culturally sensitive of you. So we've gone over time. I think that Congressman Reichert has been waiting very patiently. Sorry, Sheriff. Thank you, gentlemen, very much for spending
Good
so much
job.
time. Could I ask everyone to give a round of applause to our panelists? Thank you.